So this is maybe small potatoes for her.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call the meeting or call to order this October. I'd like to call to order this operations work group meeting dated November 13th, 2023. To start out, we've got a few public speakers. I believe one written, two virtual. That's correct?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Our first speaker is Aharon Shalef.
Hi, everybody. I'm a junior at Madison West High School. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather today, so I'm just going to keep it really short. But essentially, I just wanted to come and emphasize how important sustainability is to the students that I've talked to and that I know at all the high schools, honestly, and how really as we're starting to see the impacts of climate change grow worse and worse, we really can't delay any action. We need to act now. So I very much hope that today the board will see the results of the assessment for the facilities and start working on a plan to really achieve those renewable energy goals, especially 100% by 2040. Honestly, as a relatively forward-thinking city in Madison and one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we really should be leading in this effort. We cannot wait till the last minute. We have to act now. So I strongly encourage you to really push for that renewable energy in our facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brianne Dixon Crew.
Hello. My name is Bryn and I'm a senior at West High School. And similarly, I just wanted to emphasize that there's a lot of student support from people I've talked to for the integration of sustainability into our schools' infrastructures and the implementation of the clean energy goals. And I encourage you to prioritize the climate in your deliberations on budget and upcoming initiatives such as new HVAC systems and clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Our written statement is from Judith Stadler regarding the operations work group agenda building condition report. Pretty much advocating for a sustainability coordinator to help manage different grants and projects the district can take advantage of to reach the sustainability goals. So thank you, Judith Stadler. Moving on to our first agenda item is budget forecasting, where we begin to take a look at how the 24-25 budget will take shape. And with that, I will hand it off to our financial manager, Bob.
I think we missed the minutes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so real quick, yeah, motion to approve the minutes dated October 9th. I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated October 9th, 2023.
Second, Maya.
Second. Talia, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we can move on to budget forecasting for 24-25. Bob, take us away.
All right. So I want to start out with the existing strategic framework and our goals, which are always important for us to stay focused on the goals that have been developed. First goal being every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, and community. The second goal of the district in every school, it is a place for children, staff, families, thrive, and find the third strategic goal, African American children that settle in school. Talk a little bit more about this. Talk about, how we're gonna talk about prioritizing the 24-25 budget. Our core values to go along with our strategic goals are belonging, excellence, racial equity, and social justice. Voice, focus, and creativity. They have been our core values for several years now, and continue to be so. So we're gonna start with forecasting this, you kind of advance to the slide. And we'll come back to the facilities condition report, two more. Because, one more. Perfect. All right, kids first, our focus, the budget forecasting. The budget that we just approved, the board just approved the 23-24 budget, if you want to go to the next slide, really sets the stage for 24-25 budget forecast. So I want to do kind of the highlights that we've talked about in a few slides to start with the refresher in terms of school finance. And it begins, Jesse, the next slide, about where we are at with our revenue limit 3-year rolling average. And so you could see the last several years, we've been in a pretty steady decline. The big news that we shared after the third Friday of September is that the declines have leveled off. We're basically, in essence, the same number of counts for revenue limit purposes as enrollment as we were the year before. There was a considerable increase over our June budgets. But to say the least, revenue limits in terms of what we're looking at for 23-24 is our enrollments are declining. And so a little bit about revenue limits. Revenue limits set our picture of revenues that are available from year to year combined for most of our operations, general aids and property taxes. When your enrollment's declining, the revenue limits are calculated on 3-year rolling averages. Our revenue declines quicker than any district could possibly, any board could possibly reduce their costs, right? So, and that's by design. The law wasn't intended nor able to handle 3/4 of the district in the state in declining enrollments, right? So our first and foremost is in declining enrollments, the revenue limits. Our revenue will continue to shrink unless two things happen. Really only two things. Our enrollments increase or the voters approve an exceeding of the state imposed revenue. So that's the first piece. The foundation of finances revenue limits always has been for a long time now. Let's see if you want to go to the next one. This next slide we talked about, and this is from our budget. Let you orientate yourselves a little bit to the slide. Orange is our revenue limit in total. So now we're moving from the actual individual enrollment counts to taking a historical look at our total revenue limit and the amount it has changed compared to the blue line.
Recording in progress.
Which is inflation. And so you can see by voter approval, we were able to increase our revenues above the CPI inflation some years and kind of hovered for the most part fairly close. The voters in 2020 approved increase, actually an ongoing increase exceeding the revenue limits by several $1 million a year. This year, we are in the last year of that referendum in 2020 that increased our revenues by $10 million. In addition, in the 23-25 state budget, the legislature, Governor Evers signed into law $325 per member increase to revenue, which is all good news. Bad news is inflation has been considerably higher the last few years compared to what the revenue limit has allowed us and the rest of the 400 districts in the state to increase their revenue limit picture. So it has created a widening gap between ongoing costs and available revenues, and a large gap between ongoing revenues inflation. So, that's the second piece, right? Revenue limits and then our aids. And our aids, as you can see in the chart, were slightly increasing for a while, really, as the rest of the state and additional aids were put into the general school aids appropriation. Our overall share of aids, although not large as a percentage of our budget, declined this year in terms of our certified aid in 23-24. And so revenue limits, again, a reminder, is revenue limits calculation, complex based on 3-year rolling enrollment. Take that and you subtract your general aids that is certified every October 15th, and we get the total tax available to support most of the operations of the district. Now, I will tell you, for several years now and ongoing here, our district is funded with about 10% of state aids and 90% of property taxes, right? There are districts that are exactly the reverse of that. But Madison is about 10% funded with state aids, 90% supported by the property tax. Okay. Now, this next table, I will just say for the record, is very complicated and a whole page of numbers. So I'm kind of proud that I was able to.
Okay.
I pressure tested this with members of the budget planning and accounting team, and they confirmed with me that, yep, you can simplify it just like this, Bob. And I said, why don't we make it easier like this all the time? So long pages of constant detail. But anyways, I digress. Purpose of this is to talk about 23-24, setting the stage for 24-25. So we talked about revenue limits. We talked about our decline in enrollment. We talked about our total revenue limit picture, not keeping close the last few years to the rate of inflation. We talked about shrinking state aids, and now we need to talk about our general fund condition. And I'll start with 22-23. We ended last year with about $6.7 million into our fund balance, which is the net change in fund balance. The budget that was approved a few weeks ago, estimated at this point in time, is $12.4 million into our fund balance at the end of the year. Now, you can see by the beginning and ending fund balance, we had a fund balance, and we're spending that fund balance down. I will say a budget is as good as it is when you approved it and the next day it changed, right? A budget is a breathing, living document that constantly changes. But we're forecasting that we have ongoing expenditures that exceed our ongoing revenue, which is what this chart tells you, right? That last year we ended in 23, and we're projecting this year to be short $12.4 million. So that's kind of the stage for 23-24. And it has one more big piece that we need to deal with. So the next slide. That is the federal fiscal cliff that we have been talking about since the federal government, pre-COVID and COVID, provided additional federal dollars and revenues for us and other districts and states to deal with the pandemic. For us, our fiscal cliff has a price tag, $40.46 million that we have budgeted in 23-24. And these monies will go away in September of 2024. And so I want to provide a little bit of the detail behind this, the positions and what we have ahead of us as we look at 24-25. And so within that $40.46 million, we have two groups of funding in terms of FTE, in terms of staff. I want to talk about the one-time allocations. And so in 23-24, about 78 FTE have been approved. And that's in comparison to 76 FTE we had in 22-23. So in addition to these one-time positions, and when I say one-time positions, these positions have been identified as one-time in nature when they were created, when we work with programs and staff to say, these are initiatives that have been created using one-time ESSER dollars to meet the needs of our scholars and our families, and other priorities set by the board the last few years. It's going away at the end of 23-24. In addition to those positions, we moved 110.9 FTE or about 111 FTE from local funding source on the ESSER three, right? So when we're talking about 24-25, I'd love to say we're just gonna focus on those 111 and figure out how to get those back onto local funding sources, but in reality, we're really talking about the 111 plus the 78, or more like, 190 FTE. Just those 111 positions has a price tag of about $12.4 million. That is currently not on 12 point plus fund balance negative at 23-24, does not include the need to move these 111 positions back on the local funding sources for 24-25, right? That'll be part of our conversations about the 24-25 budget. I've said it already, but I want to say it again. I believe you as board members and prior administrators at Madison have been very clear to folks about how we've used our ESSER dollars, what were designated as one time, which were local positions that we moved temporarily to ESSER and intend to move back. But I will also say, right, people sometimes kind of be reminded of this and doesn't make the decision and the work ahead of us any easier, right? And so we'll have to talk about those topics, including federal funding as part of 24-25. And so I will take a pause there and ask if there are any questions or any other discussions, pieces that I may have missed or questions.
Any questions from board members so far? I see board member Mosner Feltham.
Thank you. Bob, can you repeat the dollar amount that it would be to cover those 190 FTE one more time? I just want to make sure I have the exact right number.
I shared 12.4 million, and that's for the 111 positions that we have to move on to local funding sources. I did not include the other 78. But
Got it.
that 12.4 is part of the 40.46, right? I try to come up with kind of scales to kind of blend the rates. So right now I'm kind of stuck on 125,000 per FTE. When we're talking about how many positions would this be if we need to fund something or if we need to reduce programming. It's obviously different for the type of position we're talking about needing to remove, but I think for purposes of conceptual laying out big pieces of our budget, 125, 130,000 per FTE, that's salary and benefits is a good kind of rule of thumb.
Okay,
Makes
thanks.
it easier for conversations, I think. We have much for the books, but.
Right. My other question is, has there been any type of discussion about like evaluating the effectiveness of some of the ESSER positions? Like, I believe that every single person is doing hard and important work, but I wonder if there's been any conversation about like, I don't know, like what are those positions that got made using COVID funds, and how are we evaluating to what extent we need to keep them post ESSER?
Yeah, I mean, we have talked at cabinet about it. I will say I forgot to give the update. In terms of the budget book that you all looked at and voted on November 30th, we're gonna get the final copy probably sometime tomorrow, and we'll get that out to you and then published on the website by the end of the week. So we're moving along really good. Within that budget book, there's several pages of the detail of the 40.46 million, including the project, the dollar amount, and the FTEs that are to each one of those initiatives. I think as part of the ongoing conversations about 24-25, cabinet along with the administration and principals will be taking a look at each one of those programs in terms of the effectiveness. I can't tell you what were the metrics for each one of those programs when they were created. But we'll be looking at it for sure.
Thanks.
Board member Second and then board member Nichols.
Wondering if and look at this, sort of flip the numbers over a little bit and look at them from a different angle. So what I'm seeing is we'll no longer be receiving that $40 million in ESSER funds. And that we have moved some of our operating expenses, some of our permanent positions onto that. So that accounts for $12 million. If we look at any other expenses that are regular ongoing expenses, what can be added to that number to determine what that shortfall is if we're not including the newly formed programs and positions? You want me to say that a different way?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have the 40.
Right, so I'm looking at this 40, so the ESSER funding was never intended to be permanent.
Correct.
And we knew that when we were
Yep.
pulling together these great programs and staffing them.
Right.
So if we were to remove all of those programs and all of that staffing, I'm wondering at that point, what is our budget shortfall?
And you mean a subset of the 40.46?
Right.
I mean, other than just taking the 40.46 minus 12.4, that would be the difference. Truly one time that we have to look at each one of those programs to say, because I think, let me say, I think there are some things that we funded with ESSER that we talked about that align with our strategic goals and our budget priorities. I think of community schools, I think of mental health and services that are being provided. I think of two areas where I think they've shown progress and a need, right? I mean, I think. So I hear what you're saying, but other than the detail that we have, the summary information that we have in the budget book now, that totals up to that 40.46, including the position. Which actually I met last week with staff, we're gonna try to break. Kind of what you're talking about, Laura. We want to take that information that's in the budget book, what doesn't include this is to say. Which ones are the one time and which ones were local funded, right? And we're gonna provide that as we get into the 24-25. So I think that in large part will answer the questions that you have, that we can take a look at. That 40.46 from that lens, right? It doesn't currently have that breakout in our budget.
Okay, so based on your answer, I'm under the impression that we haven't moved other operating funds onto ESSER funding. We have the staffing for the 110.9 FTE, and that is it. And then the remainder of it is fully programs and staffing that were developed as part of this additional funding.
I want to do a qualifying answer.
Okay.
A little more than 4 months into it, wasn't here when all the projects were put in. The way I'm operating, those 111 are what we put from local dollars onto it. But until we kind of do what I was telling you, staff, our SERV coordinator and so to say, I need us to take this 40.46 and do just what you're asking.
Okay.
Tell me in addition to are there more than just a staff? This 12.4 million in staff. I can't answer that definitively. I don't think there's much more, but I won't know that for sure until that analysis is done.
I think that'll be really helpful. I believe that a lot of the work under ESSER really does move us forward in the direction as a district that we want to be going. And we knew that it was gonna be bad. And so figuring out how to prioritize the programs and the positions that have the most impact, I think is gonna be important. I don't imagine that we're gonna be able to make the difference.
Surely not with our existing ongoing revenue.
Thank you.
Board Member Nichols?
Yes. So just, I want to make sure I'm pressure testing my understanding. So when you talk about the general school aids history, which was slide 14. The reason that 23-24, the current school year is kind of back down from where it was even last year, is that attributed to the fact that because we've had the declining enrollment, the 3-year averages, that there are those exemptions and kind of one-time, I don't wanna say kind of annual charges, so to speak, to the district that then reduce the school aid amount, or is there another reason why that the school aid amount looks less than it did last year and the year before?
Yeah, good question. And I can get you a more detailed response, but I'll share with the equalization aid formula. And so, part of the reason is less funds being appropriated than what had historically been given in the last 3 years to school aid. So the pot of money available to distribute to us has shrunk, right?
Okay.
The legislature has chosen to put money into, we talked a little bit about the school levy tax credit, right? So a lot of money that, and that program had been held flat, but this budget, more money was put into that program. So less money was appropriated into general aids, than the legislature could have provided.
Okay,
The other thing is our costs were up. Our enrollment is down and our property value is up almost 10. And so what the formula does is says, if you spend more than average. And if you have more than average property value compared to everybody else, you will get less state aids, right?
okay,
So actually, in our July 1 aid estimate, the state was predicting that we would go into something called hold harmless.
right, hold harmless, thank
We
you. I
go out of the
couldn't think of
formula and we're just guaranteed 85% of our aid that we received the prior year.
that. Mhm.
But because enough factors, and meaning value and costs of other districts went up, Madison's back into the formula, so we are actually into the formula. And so that's really the reason why we're spending more on average and have higher property value on average. One, we did spend more, but two, as our enrollment declines, without everything being equal, right? Our costs are going up per student and our values going up per student. Even if we didn't spend any more, if our enrollment's declining, the state views us as having higher cost per student and more value per student.
Got it.
And that's how that aids is distributed.
So thank you for that. When I'm looking at the graph, it looks like the bars for starting in 2019-20 is at one level. 2021, it goes up a little. 21-22, it's up a little bit more. 2022-23, it's up more than it's been the previous 3 years. Now we're back down. So from your experience, is that kind of the trend, that it fluctuates a little bit every couple of years? Or does it really depend on where property value is, where our enrollment is, and we're literally looking at this like annually?
Yeah, all of the above what you just said is true.
Okay,
So it's a little bit of everything. I would expect our ages continue to decline.
okay,
Even with the slight fluctuation. So the numbers are 36.8 in 20, 38.5 in 21, 40.3 in 22, 44.3 in 23, and now 37.9 in 24, right?
okay,
So relatively speaking, it's pretty close.
Yeah.
What's not gonna change, we are gonna continue to be about 10% state aids and 90% on the property.
okay,
And we have been that way for several years. The numbers, a few million here and there change, right? But our trend is just that. Now, if and part of the problem is Dane County is an economic engine. We do well. Our economies are doing well. Our property values are increasing. There's wealth in Dane County and more wealth than compared to the rest of the state.
mhm,
And that's not gonna change anytime soon. That's gonna really, to me, I was a little surprised that we didn't stay in 85% hold harmless, right? Compared to the July 1 estimate, right? We're really close,
mhm.
but so I would guess we're gonna continue on this and likely move into hold harmless, but we're compared to the other 420 districts, so really need to know what everyone else can really get a good sense, but I think what's true is we're gonna continue to be 10% state aid, 90% property tax.
Okay, great. Thank you for thank you for clarifying the details on that screen. So one of the other things that I just wanna make sure I'm voicing, and I know that you're gonna ask us at some point in budget development what our kind of core values and principles are, so if I'm getting ahead, you know, just bear with me, okay? So when there was a decision last school year to move the 110 or 111 positions onto ESSER, I know that you weren't here. You know, we made a choice to really be able to address the budget gap that we had even last year. And we had some availability still with unused ESSER funds to fill that gap. And we knew that that was a very short-term gap filler. Those positions, and I don't have my budget book with me tonight, unfortunately, but you do. Those positions, 111 positions, included instructional coaches, correct? Which is one instructional coach per school. It included some behavior education specialists. Is that correct? So, and then I wasn't sure if there were any other positions. I just remember those were kind of the two big categories of employees that were moved off of local and put on ESSER. You're getting close. I see you flipping the page. It's coming.
And this is a.
Oh, an interventionist?
Interventionist, yes.
Okay. So one, I agree with Board Member Simkin and Board Member Mosner Feltham that it will be good for you all to make clear to us how you plan to evaluate any of the programs and staff positions on ESSER. Agreed. And I think there's gonna be some argument that we'll wanna try to sustain and maintain some perhaps, and others that we know are coming to an end. When it comes to those 111 positions, this is just my opinion. I don't think it is, I don't think the employees who had a change in how their salaries are being paid and their benefits are being paid, like the source of that, I don't think that's their burden to carry. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So we made a decision to move them onto ESSER. And so somehow I feel like we really do need to figure out if they were on local before, and we weren't necessarily running all of their positions through some tight analysis of like, are you effective or not? You know what I mean? Like, it just feels like those positions now are kind of put in a different level of conversation because we moved them to ESSER. So I just want to make sure that we're also giving some consideration that these are folks who didn't ask for us to change the revenue stream for their roles. So I don't exactly know how you all are thinking about weighing all of the considerations for not only positions, but also programming that people in those roles are carrying out. Do you have a general idea? And if not yet, like if you're still developing it, that's okay, because I know we just approved the budget a couple of weeks ago, so
Yeah.
Might not be there yet.
Not there yet, but I think similar to what Laura was asking, that's what staff's working on right now, to take that list that we have in our budget book, the totals of 40.46, break that out with more detail. What was local before, what is truly one time, and we'll add into this, what were our metrics, what were the conversations we were having this, which is just the history of both working with the other assistant superintendents, talk about evaluation, right? Which, these are good questions, right? And I know I've said this before, but it's definitely worth repeating. Our 24-25 budget work is gonna be like none other we've ever done before. We are in a spot with our finances and I believe the lack of state support that the legislature should have been providing, that historically was provided, that just has not been provided. We are in a spot where this district has never been in before in terms of to evaluate our base operations and what we believe our scholars and families need. And there is not the revenues that the state has historically really, and I believe should have been provided, right? We're in a unique spot. It's like none other that we've been into.
Well, and I think, Bob, right, some of these positions were one-time positions like we're all talking about that got added with the ESSER money.
Yep.
Then there's all these other positions that got moved over to free up money local, right, to do other things. So we have to look at, where in the budget can we perhaps make some adjustments? We do every year, right? We always try to be fiscally responsible, make some adjustments. We may need to make some reductions in some areas. I think we have an obligation to look at all of our funding sources, including state and federal funding sources. Because some of these 110 that were moved over were core to the beliefs that we have in the district about moving teaching and learning forward. So I do think that, if we're talking about moving those back to local, something's got to give on that side. And then we will also, right, be thinking about at the same time we're moving the 110 over, what is going to be happening with health insurance costs, right? We're going to be looking at that. There's a cross-functional team that's looking at that right now. And we will likely see some adjustment in premium in that. So we'll be looking at that too. So there are different levers in the system. And then we will be looking at what pot of FTE goes out in buildings, right? We want to keep the cuts away from the classroom, away from the building. What does that look like? What does our staffing bucket look like? What does our insurance bucket look like? All of those different pieces we'll have to figure out. And then also figure out where we can adjust. But we're taking the first step. Actually, we've got people gathering information around ESSER positions. So we'll be starting to take a look at those in some of our team meetings over the coming weeks, so that when the time comes to do workbooks and staffing, right, we have to know what's the pot of FTE they're going out to buildings. Schools are going to have to start planning. Then they have to start planning in February. So we have to do a lot of work over the next couple of months so that schools can get set up for success. And those workbooks generally get built in January. There are some decisions that have to be made and some changes that will likely have to be made, but those are sort of the big pieces in the budget process.
Yeah. So can I just, thank you, Lisa. I see that my fellow board members ready to also weigh in, so I'll just ask, is there something in particular that would be helpful from board members at this point? Because I ask this because in a previous year that we were developing the budget, I think there were some of us asking for some greater insight and visibility around the thinking about what kinds of programs are you thinking about cutting, which partners, like, because every year we're making hard choices. And I understand that you all need time to do the work, and department folks and principals need time to do some of the best thinking. And I also think my own personal opinion is probably not helpful when we come in later with more, a different line of thinking about what we think should be in or out. So is there something that would be helpful at this point in the budget development?
I think, yes, I think we get to the next section about
Yeah.
guiding principles for budget development. The vision and the goals that we have, which is building off of the same vision and goals that we used to develop the 23-24 budget. I think that's when it comes.
Okay.
And I think that'll be the opportunity, because then we'll talk about once we get agreement from the board where you want your priorities and goals to be, then we can start developing some more specific tools for the departments to use to really say, whether this was one-time funding on ESSER or local revenues that changed ESSER, this is why this is an important program, and these are what's gonna meet your vision and goals that we laid out as priorities for 24-25, which is what we're gonna need, right?
Thank you.
Board Member Muldrow?
Yeah, my first pretty pointed question is our current budget fully staffed?
In terms of vacancies,
Yes.
Jennifer online, I thought. I probably don't have the most current number, I know I don't, I looked a few weeks ago and I thought we still had 80 vacancies.
So we have some.
Yeah.
Would be savings from vacancies.
Yes,
So we have 8 vacancies across the entire district right now.
yeah, and Jennifer. I checked a few weeks ago and that was the number, I have not checked the recent HR reports, but yes.
Okay,
that was the district.
that feels inconsistent with what I'm hearing from even individual schools in terms of vacancies and some of what I'm observing myself. So I am a little curious around, you know, we're hearing folks say that they're short-staffed, and I guess that could be related to call-ins. But we're also hearing that there are still some big gaps or missing people in buildings.
I think there are different vacancy rates in different buildings. Some schools will say they are fully staffed, like I talked with a high school principal a couple of weeks ago, and he said he had like 3 vacancies people are covering and they're feeling pretty good. But you can talk to another school and they're like, we're dying. You know, we've got missing people at each grade level, we're missing, so I think it is school specific. And I'm actually just trying to pull up the HR
But
report.
if in total, we have 8 vacancies across the, I'm sorry.
Oh, 80.
80, okay.
That's why I felt
Thank you.
like.
See, that's because I thought.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
That- I was
That's
like,
why I
I
added
was
to
like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
8-0.
was thinking it was 8.
So we have
Oh.
80 vacancies.
Yeah.
How much does 80 vacancies generate and save revenue per month?
Again,
If we go to that 125,000 per
Right.
vacancy?
Yeah.
So 125,000 times 80?
Yes. Say it off the top of my head, but I'm afraid to.
Let's see.
$10 million,
I'm sorry?
$10 million.
So $10 million a month is what we are generating
A year.
in savings
A
a year.
A year.
So a little over $1 million.
Maybe it's a million.
Full time, they've been vacant
Yep.
for a full year.
Okay. We talk a lot about declining enrollment, but we did see a gain in enrollment this year. And I guess in looking to next year, I would say Madison is a unique city in comparison to the rest of the state, in part because it has a specifically thriving economy, but also because it is a growing city. And there are some indicators in terms of our neighboring cities that we would continue to be a growing city and continue to see increases in students moving forward. Although, given birth rates, next year should be a decline. Can you talk about balancing kind of birth rates and the growth of the city and the pace at which the city is growing?
Yeah, twofold. Our research and development team has been working with UW Applied Pops, and they're gonna, the instruction work group in December, come out with those enrollment projections. They had some preliminary district-wide, they're working on school attendance areas, specific enrollment projections from UW Applied Pops. Getting a little ahead of ourselves, but those enrollment projections along with the facility information that we're gonna share tonight really will inform the long-range facility plan in terms of where we have growth in our area and where we do not in school attendance boundaries. I will say, there has been significant growth in the city of Madison, but I would say without having all the data in front of me, my sense is the area that was growing within the city of Madison are not within the Madison school district. They lie in other school districts, still city of Madison, but not feeding Madison School District. Think about the far west side and the Middleton, Cross Plains, Madison, and Verona. You think about our north and east side, the areas that are growing. That looks like it's Madison, could be the Sun Prairie School District, right? So they're definitely growth areas, but whether they're feeding our students, our residents, that's where I think we're gonna probably need a little bit more analysis than UW Applied Pops is gonna be able to provide us in terms of that kind of analysis. And we've contracted with some firms in the past to give us that.
I greatly appreciate kind of the nuance in which you're thinking about that. And one of the things I think I want to be aware of is that for years we've said the fastest growing population in our district is Hispanic students or English language learners. When we look at the growth we saw this year, is that consistent with that analysis? Are we seeing a growth in a specific demographic of children?
I don't know the answer to that,
I don't need.
of that 500, what that is. We can
I-
get some information.
I think there's relevant aspects of that, particularly if we are seeing growth in our ELL population, because I think there's specific funding implications. The last question I have is related to inefficiencies in our budget and duplicative services. I'm gonna use our healthcare as an example. Can you talk about why we have two different healthcare providers and how much the district spends annually on healthcare?
Couple of things. I can give you the percentage increase. We have some charts that were based on last year's cost because we're still just getting into the enrollments for 24. I know our Dean HMO went up 3% and GHC to courts cost us 13.1%. I can pull some of the specific dollar amounts. Just want to see if we had any. I'm not gonna spend, I can pull those numbers.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I do think it's an area that we need to take into consideration, given the shift in the costs for healthcare right now. I think it is a really lovely thing to be able to provide the folks who work with us with options. I also think it may not be the right utilization of resources at this time. And I think we need to think about that pretty thoroughly and intentionally. I do think where the rubber meets the road when we talk about ESSER is that my understanding is we're in a use it or lose it situation with ESSER. So were we to not use the entire amount that we were given through this year, what happens?
We lose it, goes back, that's not gonna happen. I'll assure you that we're not sending any of the ESSER dollars back. We will manage our costs and move revenues around to make sure that we claim all eligible costs and that money is put to the use that we're allowed to use it.
I greatly appreciate that reassurance, and I would say if we look at vacancies, I am curious how, if there are vacancies in positions that we have assigned to ESSER, how we are reallocating ESSER to use it in this immediate moment on all the things that you can apply ESSER to, which is, expansive and intentionally so. I also think in the long-term conversation around ESSER and this funding cliff, we need to be mindful that we were given this funding to address the needs of our students in the wake of COVID-19. And the truth is I don't think that those needs have disappeared at this point. And so I think that we live in a community that wants to fund high quality education that meets the needs of our children. I think we need to be clear about how we're using this funding to meet our young people's needs and how those needs persist beyond this funding or this resource. That's it for my questions. Thank you, Chair Castro.
Thank you. Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is, one, can we please actually do get a list of organizations that we think we are going to cut? Because I think that would be important to prepare for that. Two, I would really, really like to see the workbooks. I know it won't happen ahead of time, because I think the board can make an important decision on equity by helping you guys instead of making it so crazy where you have to figure out how to get everything done for every school and FTE. There are 7 of us. Use us to be able to help make those decisions. I think we could help. That's just my suggestion. The third thing is on medium tier, on not, I think it's medium tier, allocate partnerships like Simpson Street, etc. Can we get a list of how many we have and what we plan on funding or not funding? That's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Bob. I think we are free to move on.
Okay. So before we move on, I just wanna address in terms of the mindset that I have, and we've had these conversations like that, starting to talk to some of the department heads and the associate superintendents. I don't really wanna talk about what areas we're gonna cut, right? I want 24, 25. We talked about the $40 million in ESSERS, board member Muldrow mentioned. We are providing services with the ESSER dollars that frankly, really our families need, and there's no other government entities providing it. Mental health services, looking at families, bridging the gaps, right? And so I really want this budget process, one, we want to talk about our vision and our goals and our priorities, but really to develop a budget that the staff and cabinet and you believe meet the needs of our students and families. Come up with a total dollar amount. Then in the spring, me and my staff and others, we're gonna try to get an estimate on revenues, and I can't stress enough how difficult that is. Not only because it's always difficult to predict the future, but because of the way the state law is tied to numbers, student counts that we don't have, that will really drive our revenue in the picture. And I'm talking about the third Friday in September. Our 24-25 revenue picture is contingent on that third Friday, September 24 number that we obviously won't know until a few weeks after the third Friday, September, months into the 24-25 fiscal year. But what I'd like us to do is to come up with a dollar amount of the budget that we believe meets the needs, then estimate our revenues. And that's really the difference, right? That I believe we need to have that to know what is a magnitude of what's missing, and then talk about how can we meet that revenue shortfall, right? Versus identifying anywhere as we think we're gonna cut. To me, we're so far removed from that conversation. Could we eventually be there? Sure, we could eventually be there, but I don't want that to be our mindset, right? I want us to work together to come up with a budget that we think meets the needs in 24-25. And identify revenues and then decide where we go. And only after that, then we talk about, we can use the same priority we use to build a budget to prioritize to have a smaller budget revenue, right? That's kind of my mindset on this.
And that's how you have the scope and sequence laid out for the operational work group.
Yeah.
So we will have an opportunity to talk about insurance, what the, Ali, to your point, what the cross-functional team is learning. Like I was pulling up all of the questions we have. We have to go to RFP to get a bid on this. So we'll have an opportunity to talk that through so that the board has an opportunity to provide feedback to that. There will be an opportunity to provide feedback into what are the educational strategies? What are the big buckets of work that we believe, right? The board, the administration believe are essential for schools to continue to run, right? That's a great place of influence that the board can have when it comes to staff in schools, is what are the big buckets that the board believes that we need to continue to sustain. So those are all going to come to us in upcoming workbooks, so that we can get the whole budget put together. So to Bob's point, to really focus on those goals and guiding principles that you're going to talk about a little bit tonight. And then does everything else that we believe in feed up to that? So it's really about what the can-dos are and where we're going to invest, so that we focus on getting that right for schools, because that's going to come up pretty quick in January and February.
I have a quick question about that with insurance. I know with healthcare last year, I think we all felt like we were in a very tough position, kind of behind the 8 ball. It was jarring. When do you think, can you give an estimate on the timeline on when the board will start having initial discussions? I imagine some things will start in closed session, what have you, but.
Yeah, I'm on a team that's meeting cross-functional. MTI has representatives on it. We're kind of mapping out some of the questions that board member Muldrow was asking. How many providers do we need? Can we do one? Generally, the idea behind that is there's not one provider that can meet our needs as an organization. There's no one big enough that can meet all the needs of our employees. So there's gonna have to be some type of partnership and coordination of services being provided in the future. At least that's what we think the landscape is. We're trying to target, Lisa mentioned January, early February. I really prefer January to go out to bid, to say, this is our plan this year. What's the bid for status quo moving forward and what kind of deal with that? So, we're meeting with NPD, our contract director, and staff to try to start mapping some of these options out, costing them out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, on that note, seeing no further questions, moving on to 5.1, the building conditions report.
Let's go to the budget principles.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, going to the budget principles, I thought we covered that. Yeah, Bob takes over budget principles.
Okay, Jesse. Yep. So, first, before we get into the guiding principles for budget development, I want to shout out to our senior leadership team. Because early on in this process, call me new, call me, don't call me, yeah, you cannot call me now. Call me new, optimistic. I was optimistic that we could develop a budget rubric tool to use for two things. Evaluate individual school facilities and admin buildings as we evaluate educational programs. I thought it was a great idea. I think it is a great idea. But tried to put some things together with the team, building services, myself, Jen and others. And we previewed it, asking our senior leadership team, what do you think about this? And they were very professional, very good, very dedicated, but it was quite obvious in about 18 minutes that this might have been a good idea in my mind, but was never gonna work. So, senior leadership team, thank you for your honest inputs. We got a better product because of it. Okay, so basically return to the good work that the agency has been doing. Equity was always, it was part of our initial tool that we previewed and asked senior leadership team to look at. But it all starts, I believe, our recommendation is continue to use equity as the main guide in the budget development process. I linked a couple of the tools that we have developed as an agency, the educational equity tool. Do you think we should click on them, show them, or just talk about it?
Sure, I think we can click on them.
You want to click on that first one? I call this one the roadmap. I don't know really what it's called. And these have all been developed by prior staff and the Board of Education in terms of the use. I think this educational equity tool works very well. There's a 6-step process that talks about what is the proposal and desired outcome. Step 1, what are the data and what do they tell us would be step 2. How have communities been engaged and are there opportunities to expand engagement, including proposal input? The 4th step is who benefits from and who will be burdened by the proposal, and what are our strategies for advancing education equity and mitigating against unintended consequences. And then step 5 is what is the implementation plan, and then step 6 is how will we ensure accountability and monitor and communicate results, right? So I think a very good strategy, very useful tools that we can work with our departments to talk about equity and keeping equity as our focus. And then Jesse, if you want to go to the next one. I like both of these tools and I think working together. What I really like about this next tool is, and I know we could combine the two, but we didn't for this. I wanted to kind of get a clear guidance, and I assume the answer is going to be yes, equity is important. I really like, this is the same, basically 6 steps, but what I really like about this is the community engagement and how the ribbon is tied across all the steps. I think it's very important. Particularly, as I've said, 24-25 budget development is going to be a budget that this board and this organization has never had to develop in the past. Where we are with revenue limits and the lack of state support in terms of partnerships with state revenue.
Recording in progress.
And so I really think it's important that in terms of the two tools that we really keep that in mind. That's a difficult task to do, and it's gotta happen and it's continuing to happen. And so that's the first framework in terms of our equity tool. I'd like to just pause here to get a read of what the board's thinking in terms of, yes, continue or. Cool.
Board Member Nichols.
Yes. As many of you know, I worked in the district. And was around when these equity tools were developed. So a couple things. I do know that in previous years of the budget, I remember when department heads were asked to actually use the tool, and there was a template document that they would go in and complete. And so anything where they wanted to make a reduction or an addition in their budget was thought out according to the equity tool questions. And that provided at least some rationale that when it came to the board, even if we didn't have everybody's completed templates, people could speak to the thinking that they had put in around kind of the impact of the budget proposal. The one observation I will share is that the community engagement piece is very challenging, I think, for most folks who are very busy. Because intentional community engagement means that you're designing something into your day-to-day work. And you're pausing long enough to invite people, and the community engagement piece, I think, is challenging. It's possible, but I think if we're going to ask folks to really answer the question, like who's being impacted, that should not be answered by somebody who wants to keep something or, is kind of deciding by themselves what they can let go of. And so I guess I would say that if you can't really do the community engagement piece well, because you're too busy and just run out of time, I think that we need to have some other way for folks to have at least made some demonstration that they've talked with students directly or did a parent survey, or there was some other way to get some input. Because otherwise it's like you sitting at your desk answering for the people who are going to be impacted, but you never talk to them. I don't want to say never. I'm sure you have engaged with them at some point. But that's been my observation, that busy people in the district have a hard time with the community engagement piece and really hearing people who will be impacted. So I don't know if that is a step that it's necessary. I don't know if it's realistic given the time frame. I could try to come back with something that's more solution focused, but
Any other board members?
well, I'm in support of it. I didn't say that.
I can jump in and also say, I really appreciate that. And, Board Member Nichols is an expert in this type of tool. And so I definitely defer to you around the need for perhaps to make sure that it's gonna be realistic. And I really appreciate that as a start.
Board Member Moser Feltham.
I just can't hear.
Thank you. I like it too. I have two initial thoughts about it. One is something I've talked about a lot before, which is like, and I think it would probably come in the data portion, is like, what is the temporal budget of people who work in MMSD? right? Everybody who works in an MSD full-time is already working full-time and then some often. Including people on this call, including people across the nation who work in public education, but that has to be an important data point is like, if we're doing something different or changing things up, how much time does it take? And then what will we stop doing or do differently to balance that temporal budget for staff? And then the other piece that I would hope would get consideration is that many people, many stakeholders in MMSD are stakeholders in multiple ways. Staff who are parents is the one that I'm thinking about a lot right now, in light of some of the struggles that we're having that are affecting people who are staff and parents a lot. I'm talking about buses. So I would hope that when we're talking about benefits and burdens, that we're cautious and thoughtful about where people are stakeholders in multiple ways. But thank you so much for the work on this.
Great. Survey.
Sorry, Chair Castro, can I add to my last bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I had a third piece. God, I hope it didn't just fly out of my head. Oh, as we're thinking about these proposals, I hope that there's also consideration of how they fit in with other work. Like if this can be a site of de-siloing some of the work that happens in schools and across the district, that would be just so solid.
I would agree, that'd be solid. Okay, seeing no other questions from board members, our next agenda item 5.1 is the building conditions report.
We're not done yet, Chair. I want to talk about our budget vision goals. Oh, building on the.
Okay. Go ahead.
I appreciate you keeping it. Okay.
Straight through.
All right, this won't be long, but it's very important, right? So, and I will say, these are the vision and goals are very similar to vision and goals, but slightly different than we use for, and it's worth working through this. And this is where I give another shout out to our comms department, because for those of you that are getting to know me, you know, I don't mind black and white tables and spreadsheets. It does the work for me, but I know there are visual people and we have some amazing comms folks. So they take my simple, black and white tables and they create this thing of beauty. So 24-25 budget vision. I want to read what the slide has because I think it's important, and I'm gonna start with the first one, which is the red part of the wheel in terms of allocating resources in line with our current, which I understand my history in the last month, that the district has historically spent a lot of time on the existing framework. There's information that I have linked in the notes to that strategic framework, and also a report, the 2023 annual report as a measure of the framework. We're not going to spend time taking a look at those, but the important point is we continue to allocate our resources in line with that strategic framework, and equity and goals that we started the presentation are part of that strategic framework. The next I move to the right in terms of the blue tile, I'll call it, the blue part of the wheel. And it's investing in priorities that address the racial, linguistic and socioeconomic inequities that currently exist. Kind of building on the current strategic goal about focusing on our African American students, right? And I think as we look forward and look at the needs of our dollars, that focusing those priorities on those areas is going to be an important conversation as we move forward. I think the implementation in terms of how we implement a budget to meet these priorities, we'll continue to talk about and develop with cabinet and you all in terms of the staff about what are different ways on the financing side that we can achieve that. The next is the green, and that's about investment in facilities that reflect a focus on sustainability. It was mentioned by some of the public comments. Still, obviously, the resolution that was passed in March of 2019 in terms of the renewable energy resolution, along with the comprehensive energy plan done on October 22, is still a huge part and is a priority for the board and the district. In terms of a vision. Then the next is, I'm gonna skip over the orange one on the bottom. Talk about the equitable distribution of resources to students with the highest needs. And again, we're gonna be using the equity tool to help us determine what are those highest needs. And finally, and lastly, and a good place for it, the way I look at the world, is alignment of our resources for financial and operational stability over time. And the way I look at it, the money follows the strategic vision and goals of the district. The money doesn't tell us where we're going. The money follows the vision and goals in our equity tool, right? But it's about how we take that and align our resources and be stable over time. We talked a little bit about. So then just go to the budget goals, Jesse, which is really kind of a focusing on the vision down to 4 specific goals. And the first is to sustain the momentum that you have already invested in terms of early literacy and beyond, and the strategies for K through 12, right? I think they're showing some success, and we need to continue as part of our 24-25 budget goals. The second is build on practices that, again, talking about the vision of addressing racial, linguistic, and socioeconomic inequities, which have evidence of success and promise for the future. We talked a little bit about our community schools. We've got some grants out right now to get some outside money for community schools. I think the early data is showing progress in Madison. There are other districts that have been doing community schools longer nationwide, and they do have data that shows success. So I think that's one of the areas that I think is important for us and obviously you have to tell us that this is important in terms of a goal for the 24-25 budget development. And then quickly behind those, because we can't achieve the first 2 goals without investing and continuing to invest in hiring the highly qualified workforce, right? You can't do 1 and 2 without 3, so it kind of goes hand in hand with that. And then finally, again, just this notion of maintaining a multi-year long-range perspective on our revenue sources and our strategic investments and facility upgrades that we're going to do, right? Next, but those would be the budget goals. So with 2 of those combined, I'd just like to pause and get a check of where you are all at, because once we get an A-OK on that, we've already begun to develop. What President Nichols mentioned this. We have a budget development form, a narrative that we're going to build out to share with the departments to request the funding multi-years, and that's what our decisions tonight will be used that, and we can bring that back. Thank you.
Board Member Muldrow.
Yeah, so my first comment is for my fellow board members. Thank you, Chair Castro. Last year, before our budget was released, we did a series of listening sessions with the community. My hope is that we are able to engage with the community around this budget in that same way. I think it's important going into a budget as complex as the next one that we are informed by our community in real time. My second response to kind of what you just brought us through is I deeply appreciate that we are centering on our values. And I think our values show up in a lot of places, including our policies. And so one of the things I feel like was missing for me is how certain policies really play into our work moving forward. We've talked about a structural deficit for the last couple of years. And I think the complexity in our structural deficit really comes to taking into consideration our policy 6071. So that is our policy on fund balance. I want to say that I think it's important we look at that policy, if for no other reason than the policy ends with that every 3 years, the superintendent and the superintendent's designees and the board will review that policy and see if that policy continues to work for us. The other thing I think is important to acknowledge about our fund balance policy is that we've never gone under the amount required by that policy. But we have in recent years gone over that policy. We have had more fund balance than that policy allows us to have. And given kind of the current climate, we may want to consider a shift in that direction. And then the other policy I want to highlight is policy 6078, which is around surplus resources and what we do with them. There were a lot of moving parts going into our October vote, Bob. I am curious what we're looking at for spending down fund balance at the end of this year, where we should be, and what that means about kind of our long-term stability in terms of fund balance. And, you know, kind of if we're set up to lose 8 million this year in fund balance, what does that look like? Does that mean it turns into 16 or 24 million over the course of the next few years pretty rapidly?
Thank you. One thing I will say that is coming up missing for me, and maybe it's more aspirational with our research and data team, but more intentional efforts to substantiate or track the impact of the investments that we're making. That was a common question with regard to ESSA or ESSER to measure the impact, but more emphasis on measurement in our investments. And Board Member Nichols, it looked like you were developing a question. I see Board Member Mosner-Feltham, while you're under development.
Thank you. I think the thing that, thank you, I'm excited about working with everybody here on this. It's an honor. The thing that comes to mind when I'm looking at the pink one with the scales of justice, which says build on practices that address racial, linguistic, and socioeconomic inequities, which have evidence of success and promise for the future. Sometimes I feel like the nature of education is that like there's like research fads. And I would hope that we're trying to be really conscientious about what our framing is for what seems like evidence of success. And when something looks like it's has promising evidence of success, making sure that that's like realistic for our system, for one thing, right? Like a lot of the research out there is like based on like test cases that don't resemble our schools. And then the other thing I'm thinking about, not that this is like gonna be 24-25, is like when we think about what are promising practices with evidence of success around planning time and around load, right? Like, can we change full-time from 5 sections to lower? Like, probably not. But like when we talk about what it will take to really support our students with what they need, I hope that we have some big dreams about that. I hope that was clear and not too like Pollyanna-ish.
Thank you. Board Member Nichols.
I'll have to come back to it later. I'm not. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. I think this is it. Is this it, Bob?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Facility, like it.
All right, the facilities condition report, item 5.1. For this item, we have Frederick and Spetland on hand to go over the support. There's also a link to the work being done on long range facilities that will get down the line in the coming months.
So, Jesse, can you go back to earlier on, facilities report, is please on the third or fourth slide. I'll give the overview and then I'll walk us through the memo and the table before we get into that, and then Cedric and Svetlana, I have more detailed questions. If we have them, yeah, you could just click one more forward now. Okay, and then again, so the 2023 facilities condition report. Just a little background in terms of this work. This is ongoing work, goes back to 2016. The partnership with some very experienced and seasoned consultants and energy experts. The study team included our building services and their engineering team, along with two vendors, contractors, design engineers. This is ongoing work that has been done. Before we get into the next steps, I want to kind of get into the memo and the chart. But I want to talk a little bit about the work that has been done and that is continuing to be done to develop this. And so this is just a summary table that we provided memo. The full report was very long, hundreds of pages. We're trying to make clear what we want to make public and what we want to keep internal. And our goal is to have that to you by the end of the first week of December. So by December 8th, the full report. The idea being, once we get that full report to you, then we'll put that full report on the website. But there's a lot of complex information, a lot of information to digest. So we spent a lot of time, I will say, changing the format of the prior facility condition report to get it into a format that we, the team, believe will really address a real important goal for the board, and that is sustainability. And then also the condition of our current facilities and what's necessary to take a look at those facilities and make them and improve them, right? You might hear us slide into a terminology that talks about bringing a facility up to C or a B, because that was the terminology that has historically been used. We're trying to move away from that with this 2023 update in terms of the facility report. And so again, we'll have that full report to you by December 8th. And then, but tonight we wanted to share the table and the memo to kind of walk you through the details. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I won't assume that you read the memo. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna walk through the memo as we walk through the table. So let's just take a look at the table, because the memo in my mind really just describes the table that's before you, right? So you can go back to the memo to get some of the points that I want to cover. So first and foremost, again, this is the 2023 update of work that's been ongoing several years in process. And the biggest change in a lot of work, and a shout out to building services, and Cedric and the engineering team working with the consultant, is really to this first big section of the report. The costs are divided into projects to meet our renewable energy resolution, which is the details are mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire suppression. That's the orange section of the report. And then followed with that, which goes not to be separated, goes with it is this architectural components to complete the facility specific renovation. Right? So those are the two big cost categories. I'll get a little bit more into the details, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. And so then the report is divided, as you'll see, our elementary schools, our combined elementary and middle schools, the standalone middle schools, and one combined middle and high schools, and then other is really just the Doyle administration. What you won't see in this report are facilities that are currently under renovation from the 2020 referendum, right? So comprehensive high schools, the Capitol High work, and Southside Elementary, right? So we're focusing on the facilities that still need to be attended to. So what's, the next step is this composite grade, right? And so the composite grade is an overall grade, and that overall composite grade, and in this case, Nuestro Mundo Elementary School, it's the Frank Alice building where Nuestro Mundo currently is housed at World Highway, right? So it's the Frank Alice building where Nuestro Mundo is. And so, once you get this full report, there are 14 individual facility components that are looked at. And I won't say it's a straight mathematical average, but informs the composite grade that you see here in this table. So each in the report, you will see each one of these 14 categories with a letter grade by school facility to help inform a bit more detail of what this composite grade is. So, and then the memo describes what the grade A is from excellent to F, extremely poor. Good news is we don't have any facilities of composite score of F. We do have some facilities that have individual component scores of F that you see. When the full report is released. The other thing, and it's real important in terms of all the details as we go through these components, is although there is specificity on the 14 components, the dollar amount associated with it, and we've totaled the bottom in terms of, we'll just pick HVAC, right? For elementary schools, HVAC is coming in at $166.2 million. This is not designed, nor the numbers have been put together to say, oh, we can spend $166.2 million in HVAC, including heating, ventilating, air conditioning, will be taking care of elementary school. That would not be true, right? Because the HVAC, really, these costs have to be read horizontal.
Yeah.
So Nuestro Mundo at Frank Alice, you have to read the individual components that are displayed vertically, but you have to read horizontally. In other words, this report is meant to look at facility by facility to attend to this school building, but knowing the components are graded like across, right? So if you start tearing apart the individual components, it's not that you can't do that. It's just that this dollar figure would likely be much higher to go in to focus on one component of a building that needs so much more work, right? Then the other thing, and this is looking ahead to the long-range facilities plan, that our goal is for the operation work group to talk about this work along with the enrollment projections will inform our updated long-range facilities plan. We'll first start talking about that long-range facility plan at the January 2024 operation work group, right? So it's this facility condition report along with our enrollment projections that will inform the long-range facilities plan. That long-range facilities plan then will really prioritize this facilities conditions report along with our enrollment projections and to map us out. Okay, so saying that, that's the report of the information. I think I got all the major components laid out. I always like to go to the bottom. So if you look at all these things taken care of, it is a total of $968.7 million. And this is laid out in the memo. Current costs, right? We're not going to be able to manage 40 some buildings in tangible time. So these costs are not adjusted for. We won't get to some of these projects for 15 years, maybe 20 years, maybe. So the costs will go up. These are current dollar costs.
The only other thing I would add, Bob, I know we talked about this, is these aren't in any order of preference or importance. These are just clustered by, the orange set is the group of projects around renewable energy. And then the blue are the architectural components. We just wanted to be clear, there's no specific order in terms of, I guess I would say importance, or this is first most important, this is last most important. These are just literally clusters related to the architectural and then the renewable energy resolution.
Correct.
And folks in the room may be drawn more to one area than another, but this is meant to show that these are the individual pieces that make up a school site and that they are all, as Bob said, To do one could cause prices in some of the other areas to go out to do some, but not all. I mean, there's a whole sort of science to this, but I just wanted to be clear, there's no reflection of importance here. In terms of what comes first in the list, what comes last, it's just how they're clustered in those areas.
Now, listening to the schools are basically alpha, but it's the consultants and us picking what we're gonna go alpha or. For instance, Mundo, you can guess why it's there, because it's Alice, right? So you have to just kind of take it with a grain of salt. Some of this is historical, right? This is an update of a report that existed in the past, so some of the formatting, I think, is open, but like Lisa mentioned, it's by facility.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very useful. Board member questions, board member Nichols.
Yes, the first question I have is, does the current grade or kind of composite grade, does it include the work that has been done over the last 2 to 3 years on HVAC?
Yes.
So it's inclusive of that, okay.
Yeah, these costs are Svetlin and Federican Building Services working with an attempt to say, this is what's needed at these facilities today.
Okay,
So it's taking into account the condition of the facilities that exist today and the work that been done the last couple of years. To be updated. Which is why the facilities that are not listed.
got it. But there was a big dollar amount on ESSER, right? That we spent on HVAC,
On high schools.
so on the high schools, okay, great, thank you.
Now-
Okay, so that would,
Yes.
got it. And then the one thing, just to clarify, maybe I missed it. None of these costs or composite grades look at roof condition. Back,
It's a yes and no, so.
okay,
One of the building components is roofing and it is included
where is that?
in study, it's under the building components. Our full report will actually break down even further into what is the specific letter grade or rules. And we do actually have a plan behind that, besides having. But the roofing is part of our exterior envelope and is included as a rating in that final report. It doesn't have a called out cost in this chart, but the grading will be part of the report.
Okay,
You good?
for right now, yes, I just wanted to.
Muldrow?
So one of the things that I think could be an indicator of how we strategize around updating our facilities to a greater extent is kind of understanding how we prioritize this work. So if the board went and said, we want to prioritize our renewable projects, I think that's really complicated because they happen at every single school. If we say we want to prioritize schools that need the most intense repair, I think there's some complexity in that in terms of what that means for other schools that are in a slightly different situation. I do want to highlight that nobody's accumulative grade was F. I also don't think anybody's accumulative grade is A.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do think that says we are at a point where we have to reconcile that our ability to fund in our basic infrastructure has been compromised by the formulas that indicate how schools are resourced. And one of the things I think is missing for me in terms of what our strategy would look like is the occupancy of the school, right? So if we have schools that can easily shut down to be repaired or can easily combine with other schools, what does that mean for our strategy? So if we have 12 middle schools, but we have a student population that actually fits into 8, how do we maneuver that in order to repair buildings or update buildings efficiently and effectively? The other thing, Bob, I wanna recognize that you've mentioned to us a few times is we need to have schools where there are students, right? And so if we have a neighborhood that is developed in Madison, that is gonna be a lot of homes for families and a lot of affordable housing. We want that school to be a neighborhood school to that community as it's developed. So what is our kind of awareness of where our students are? How is that informing whether or not we need another facility?
Yeah.
And do we look at that facility and go, we need a facility here and we actually no longer need a facility over here? And how do we get through that process while looking at this document?
So you raised a lot of good points. And I'll focus on the big stuff, right? So this facility condition report, along with student enrollment projections that we're gonna talk about at the instructional work group, is gonna inform the long facilities plan. And that long range facilities plan really will take a look at the facilities condition report when you talk about priorities and where that is based on student enrollment, and that's where the capacity of the buildings. The other thing, and we met this morning on the staff met this morning on starting to develop some, long range facilities, but let's start talking about options for that. You gotta have some plans to present to cabinet to get to the January operations. What this doesn't rate is, these are our costs. This facilities is a condition of the assessment that exists at the infrastructure that exists today. You can see a lot of our buildings are C and some are D. What this doesn't talk about, and we talked about, is some of the schools that were built really were built to last 20 years, and that was 40 years ago. And so the question is, does it really make sense? And this is up in that long range facilities plan, to talk about renovating an existing structure, or do we build a brand new structure right inside of that elementary or middle school, which could be the same or less than doing the renovation of the work to an existing facility? Those kind of questions I gotta be asking answers as part of the long facilities plan.
Especially,
It's not addressed here.
especially, I think when you consider the opportunity to have universal design for students with disabilities, when you talk about kind of the industry standard that is LED lights at this point in a newer facility. I think some of the things that we would end up kind of separating out piece by piece, were you to have an entirely new structure, would be a given as a component of that structure. So now that I look back at the document, I want to say we have 9 facilities that are at Ds. What does that mean for the immediate, I guess, safety and conditions of those buildings in this current moment? If I'm a parent and I'm looking at that assessment, it's concerning.
Yeah, I mean, agreed, right? And we do have some facilities and you know, the memo talks about the definition, is below standard, and you see the life expectancy. Talked about that, right? A lot of buildings built in 50s and 60s really were not built to last much more than 20 or 25 years, and we're long past that in terms of expectancy, which is when you start looking at some of the sites of the elementary schools, unlike our comprehensive high schools where there's some historical significance and you want to maintain that, a real question arises. So a lot of these buildings are just that, right? Does it pay to put money in on a building, or is it pay to build brand new, right? But again, this is just an assessment of the existing facilities and what is needed with the sustainability goal in mind, the rest of the components.
I guess my last comment will be is that I think looking at the integrity of our structures and what kind of long-term investments we're making right now. So the repairs and investments we're making, how long are they supposed to last? And how are we interacting in real time with knowing we made these huge investments or referendum investments, and in order to maintain those improvements, we have to we have to have people who clean our buildings. We have to have people who take care of these things so that we really see the return on that investment in the long term. And some things just have a shelf life. And what are we doing in terms of our budget for repair for the inevitability of replacing a roof, replacing a heating system, updating things like windows. And I think looking at kind of, we have buildings that were for the most part built in another century. And some, you know, need a really significant degree of renovation in order to be up to the standard I think any of us want for our young people. That's it for me, Chair Castro.
Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thank you. I wanted to appreciate Board Member Muldrow for bringing up the possibility as the long-range facility plan takes shape of moving populations of students rather than asking students and staff to try to do school years while simultaneously undergoing construction. I understand and have a little bit of experience that it's so incredibly disruptive to the process of education, to running a building, to be simultaneously managing construction, that just like an amount like an intellectual capacity you wouldn't believe of like what ought to be about instruction and student support goes into managing the construction. And I would really I appreciate you bringing that up. And really agree. So as that takes shape, to whatever extent we can avoid students and staff trying to do both things at once in the same building, I think that would be really beneficial for our students in our city.
Board Member Nichols.
Thank you, Chair Castro. My question is just about the long-range facility plan. So I did hear that the long-range facility plan will combine current state condition of the buildings plus enrollment and start to give us some strategies. Will any of the strategies get us, I don't want to say beyond the renewable energy, because we have a lot of work to do in that area, but I guess my question is, will it include any other kind of innovative thinking that isn't just the renewable energy? Or in addition to the renewable energy, I guess is a better way to ask it.
So I can help answer that question. I think our long-range facilities plan will be addressing any other initiatives that we are planning to implement. District, this is also including improving accessibility, improving site conditions, improving our portfolio. So in the long-range facilities plan, we will include our plan for the upcoming years. That will document our commitment to the school district and renovating our facilities.
Okay, so things like accessibility, that right now that's listed under the architectural components. I don't know if that's considered renewable energy or not.
No, it's
considered.
It's a separate type of bucket if we will on that report. We have grouped in the orange color all of the projects that's tied directly into sustainability goals in terms of the economy of scale. When we are tearing down a ceiling and we want to run all the infrastructure for electrical, plumbing, fire protection, our heating distribution system. However, the accessibility is a different route because it's an architectural component, not directly related to the mechanical system. That's why it has its own graph on the chart. And these are projects that actually can be addressed without doing mechanical renovations, if that makes sense. Just as an example, for example, the Dole building, we renovated the elevator without doing any upgrades to the mechanical system. This signifies a good example of how we can do the utility of it. However, if we are renovating a school like the way we are renovating the high schools right now in Capitol High, it is a great time to combine all of these projects together because we achieve even more savings. We have less environmental work and it's less fractions, and we have less mobilization cost associated with it, not to mention other costs of permitting, design, and how these standalone projects may affect the academic side of our organization, right? That what board member. Bill was talking about the disruption to the education, because every project that we do in the academic year, that may affect our scholars, right? Even if it's replacing an elevator in a school, this can be very disruptive, and we do our best to minimize the disruption. That's why we wanted to show this project as a total bundle of projects that we can do at the same time and achieve both the savings and minimize the interruption of the academic program while we are at the renovation site.
Right, okay, thank you. So in particular, the specialty areas and needs, where you're talking about looking at secured entrances, new classroom locks, security cameras, mail rooms, gym and lockers, showers, staff lounges, cafeteria, after-school program space, art rooms, music rooms, the library and LMCs. What you're saying is on this chart, well, let me just ask it this way. How were the dollar amounts envisioned for the specialty area needs? Because those almost seem like mini referendum projects, like the things that we would typically see in a facility kind of rebuild are many of the things that I'm seeing in the specialty area needs. So I was just curious how that dollar amount right now was determined.
So the full facility report when it comes, will have more detail for each one of the facilities. So although these are components for each, the dollar amounts that are associated with individual school buildings will have more detail within the report.
Okay.
Now, I want to say, just in our initial conversations, that because of the condition and age of our facilities, which is clearly laid out here, we're gonna be spending some time taking a look at what would be the cost of building them, right? If this elementary school is not historically significant and we don't need to maintain this, it's likely gonna be cheaper to, it's been mentioned a couple times, which I think is one of the pros of building new. If we have real estate at one of the elementary and middle schools to build a brand new building the side of it, then you would disrupt those elementary school classes while you're building the brand new facility. Could be considerably cheaper on some of the components, doing it that way. Be more, but we're gonna start costing something out as part of that long facilities plan conversation. Right, because we definitely need this facilities condition report to evaluate the condition of the facilities. To let us know we need to do something, right? That renovating the existing facility, is that building brand new, those are some of the conversations that have to happen.
Okay, I appreciate that. I know that we're not to look at like one column and decide that that's the column that we will fund and
I think
separate from the rest. But that one I was curious about because I know we had a conversation a few operation work groups ago specifically about like scratch cooking
yes,
and how like high quality food is a really good thing. It also can be sustainable and our kitchens aren't built out that way right now to support it. So that's just like one minor thing. That's why I was asking about like, who does the visioning and what will be the visioning process around what those specialty area needs will end up being in a bigger long range facility plan.
yeah, and I wanna make sure I'm clear here, and this is important. It's not that any one of these columns can't be done on their own, because it can be. It's just the costs are assumed to be larger, right?
Yeah, and I
Definitely. And
that
we
made a
talked-
great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Board Member Simkin, followed by Board Member Vandermill, and then I'm gonna add myself to the queue.
Okay, thank you. So I am gonna start by parsing out some of the columns, even though
Sure.
I recognize that that's not the goal of reading this way, of reading it vertically. I just wanna lift up all of the need for accessibility in our buildings. I think it's really important to say that out loud, that if we have buildings that are not accessible to everybody, that is unacceptable. Also in the life safety and specialty area columns, there are certain things that are basic safety needs for our schools. And so as we're looking at figuring out what this looks like over the next, 10 or 20 years, there may be pieces in here that as a board member, I'm gonna get a little, loud about, because we may need to look at how do we make sure every student has access to every class that they want to take? How do we make sure that we have secure locks and cameras and intruder detection systems in every school, regardless of where they are on the list to get the full upgrade? So I wanted to just lift that up. Then I have a couple of questions. One is, I've been hearing a little bit about financial incentives in the Federal Inflation Incentive Act. And making sure that we are maximizing the benefits of that. And so I just started hearing about it. I haven't done my research. I'm wondering who in here can talk a little bit about that federal program and how we can be utilizing that in either prioritizing our work or developing a timeline.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Yep.
Okay, I can speak.
Thank you.
So the Inflation Reduction Act is a series of federal grants that are intended to help organizations, public and privates, with predominantly meeting renewable energy goals, kind of the boat we are in right now, both with us. So I was part of a meeting with the Coalition for Climate Change within Dane County, and there was a lot of our entities, including our school district, as well as city of Madison, city of McFarland actually hosted in their newest net zero facility. And I learned a lot from that meeting, just with talking to other people who are utilizing these funds that they're applying together. And some of the great takeaways from my team was the discussion for microgrids and how public institutions can collaborate through that. We are not going to get further into details, but I thought that we can learn from other organizations. We can collaborate with other organizations in our path to sustainability. So going back to the Inflation Reduction Act, we did apply for a grant, but we didn't win last year, I believe that was, but we are looking for further opportunities to apply and secure funds through that. And I think collaboration with other public institutions, there is a lot that the future can offer for us in collaborating and learning from others, and also partnering with other public institutions to achieve our.
So what is the financial impact, the potential financial impact of this act? What does it provide for us if we make a request and receive it?
It depends. What I learned in that meeting that was a couple of weeks ago in McFarland was that really the partnerships are the applications that get the awards really. And as the lessons learned, we applied for that grant alone, which I find an error in our part. I think we will have a better chance if we partner with the City of Madison, partner with Dane County, partner with other public institutions. And I did also find out about collaboration of other school districts with their cities applying for these grants together, in a very similar fashion. City of Sun Prairie and school district of Sun Prairie are actually applying and actually have been awarded a small piece as well. So learning from others, I would like to take this back to our team and further discuss and engage into application for grants, specifically for microgrids and for creating microgrids within the city. I'm not sure if our institutions will be interested in that, but very few heated discussions and very technical as well generated from that meeting. So I'm hoping that we can continue that discussion and find a path to apply together with our public institutions and secure grants to help us achieve our new goal.
So Laura, we did a little bit of research on it in addition to what Svetland was doing in terms of looking at some of the sustainability projects that we were thinking about. And we brought to the board in terms of the LED lighting that could have been an eligible project where we could potentially get some additional revenues. I look at the grants, which we always look at grants that are available. Just like this condition report, right? Going to referendum to ask for approval for principal and interest, that is one way. I think looking at our current operations budgets, ongoing operating dollars, them is another way. Grants helps us offset some. Any of the partnerships like that, it's just another way of offsetting the cost of some of the projects, right? So it's a newer area, as Felon said, some districts have experience in how to get the money, so we've looked at it, but we've not had a reason to apply yet. But we're aware of it.
So is this two follow-ups about this and then I'll move on. Is this a substantial amount of money?
It depends on the type of the project.
We'll have to look at the specifics.
Right.
Okay.
So some of the projects I made aware of for our institutions that have secured the funding and executed the projects, the funding can go as far as 100%, and some of them is as little as 20 or 30%. It really depends on the type of application, and mostly the feedback from other institutions that have secured the funding already was that the bigger the partnership, the bigger the chance for success, really. So I'm looking forward for future collaboration with our institutions to work together in achieving this for our community.
Okay, well, 20 to 100% is a pretty big range.
Okay.
It sounds like a substantial amount of money on either end of the range. Is there a period of time, when does this expire, or do you have any danger of not being able to utilize?
I currently don't have the timeline for expiration.
Okay,
We'll get some information.
okay. My next question is I'm looking at this big, absolutely beautiful spreadsheet. And imagining all of the incredibly complex details that went into creating this. I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of adding a sustainability coordinator or energy manager to our district. And I'm wondering if there has been discussion about that and what their role might be in moving forward.
We have talked about it in the context of starting to have some initial conversations about 24, 25 and what we need. I think one of the things that have been clear to us for more than a year, and had our electrician work on that LED project, that there's considerable work involved in terms of putting together the proposals, monitoring the energy use and making wise choices. And we're not staffed in that area, but it's clearly an area where we can talk about reallocating resources or finding new resources for that type of position. So I know Svetlana and Cedric looked at industry standards, organizations our size, and how big a staff they have for that. And it can get pretty substantial where we really have none.
Okay. If we weren't to move forward with adding that position, who does all this work? Who's lap is this on?
So also multiple labs, really. A lot of this work in these spreadsheets and comes from the engineering team. The team that is running the referendum and maintaining the buildings and working day in and day out to support our aging facilities. I believe that an energy manager or a position that can focus on dealing with our energy consumption and energy reduction can also engage into the behavioral piece of our organization. We need to roll our sustainability approach to our scholars and our elementary, middle, and high schools in order to be effective to manage our costs down, not only because it's the right thing, but it also comes from significant cost to operate our buildings inefficiently, for example. And this has done significant amount of work historically, even before building automation has become so complex as it is nowadays, to do behavioral projects through third-party entities. McKinsey was one of the parts that was commissioned for 5 years. It's about 10 years. I mean, more exact on detail, but they have spent about 5 years working with our energy data and engaging in behavioral projects that benefit nowadays, because that significantly has increased our electrical and not only electrical consumption, and thus we have achieved some savings on our utilities. So we would like to expand this and take it even further and take it down to the classroom. That would be our long-term goal. It's a position like that. It's not only to manage the engineering piece of it, but also engage into all the.
So my last question is, will the long-range facility plan calculate the estimated savings of the sustainability projects?
It's a good one. Good question.
Be nice.
I think it's specific onto the project, right? And that would be I think that'd be a difficult question to answer in the long range facilities plan itself, only because specifics of the building and to take that into consideration. I think it comes after the long range facility plan is. It's definitely a component. I mean, as we've said, there are definitely savings in operations and utilities. But the flip is, and we've talked about this before, and here definitely as staff. You know, when you bring in geothermal, you're gonna do some savings, but we're also talking about adding air conditioning to all the buildings that don't exist, and that increases utility costs, right? So you're gonna save some operating on utilities on one side, but on the other side, when you bring air conditioning, you're gonna increase utility costs that don't exist today because you don't have air conditioning. So that's part of the overall cost, but we won't get that until you get a specific project and start bidding it out, getting bids in. But that's clearly part of the equation, sure.
Do you think that that would impact the proposal to move forward with any particular building? Or do you think that the difference from building to building in that savings is sort of negligible? That we'll see a certain amount of savings, but that a particular building, but a much larger impact?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think. As always, I think there's gonna be a lot of other considerations in terms of when we look at, I mean, if you think realistically. This last budget, the last 4 years, the projects we've managed, 4 comprehensive high schools, Capital and South Side Elementary, that's 6 facility projects. It's a lot more than 6 facility projects that we need to tackle. So I think the 6 the board prioritizes next. Yes, there's definitely gonna be costs and there's definitely gonna be some savings, but it's not the utility savings or sustainability that's gonna dictate what are the next 6 projects, right? We have clearly higher priorities, I believe, in terms of the education and the priorities and the needs. But it's definitely a component and a definite piece.
Okay, thank you.
All right, board member Vandermeulen.
Yes, found the report, found your research interesting, looking forward to seeing everything. My one thing that I really want to see on accessibility is in case of a fire for individuals with disabilities on how to get out there and stair climbers and those kind of things. Because we heard at the listening session last year, there was a woman at East High School who was stated she was told to just wait there and then she would be helped out and rescued by the fire department. And that really concerns me. And I know there are stair things that can be attached in case of a fire and that. And I want to know how much that would cost to put that in the buildings and whether or not that we could get a grant on that through IDEA has some, although IDEA does not have that funding, there are some grant companies that do work with that. And I'm wondering if there could be granted some of those type of accessibility devices in case of emergencies. That's it.
2 quick questions and then just endorsing of an idea. Of all these categories, which category do you think includes school kitchens and cafeterias?
So the kitchens, cafeterias are under specialty line item, and I think the board will be very pleased in the next couple of months that we will present some information around what will be take to improve our food and nutrition cafeterias. We don't have this information right now, but we currently have an RFP that is gaining some attention on our website and vendor nets for it is a study for parenting our elementary people into full graduate. So once we evaluate the results of the RFP, we will work with the selected service provider to identify what would be the cost, what would be the projects, what will be like timeline wise and boards with some data. Got it. This in the works. We're just waiting for the technological process of the RFP to come down, evaluate the.
Yeah, thank you so much. Such just pointed out, there's more details in the memo, so we'll surely look into that. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I imagine that, you know, I'm sure we'll all be interested in a process with engagement, research, science on a school by school basis on how we prioritize. There's many spreadsheet cells on this list, and I'm sure it'll look like a checkerboard or chessboard when we choose which ones we're gonna choose to prioritize. It isn't lost on me that by far the two most quote unquote expensive categories are HVAC and power and lighting. Of the total cost, it's, you know, total, this whole thing is darn near $1 billion. HVAC and power and lighting make up $521 million in that, and that's like the large chunk of where this dollar amount comes from. And it's just, I just can't help but think that these are also things that as they make us more efficient, we save more money on the operating end. And so it really is an investment when we think about it as a cost. It's an investment that will pay for itself in the over probably a 2-decade period, but nonetheless. And so I just want to co-sign the idea of some type of sustainability manager for the district to help cobble these things together. It seems very sprawling and overwhelming. And so I just think it'll help give us a sense of like organization and vision. So otherwise, thank you and looking forward to further conversations. Any more board member questions? Any parting words from Bob to the team?
I would just like to add, as we're all sitting here listening to each other, that these are pretty powerful decisions board members get to make. Like, it seems as I'm sitting here looking at this, at the numbers and the responsibilities that I know you all share, I'm really heartened by and looking forward to the opportunity to talk about some of the options where the board might go next, and just knowing that some of those decisions that you will be able to make in the coming months will inform some really pretty important educational experiences for kids to have in the coming years. So I just want to acknowledge and respect that these are the decisions that Board of Education members get to make moving forward. And I just look forward to the team giving you the information that you need to make the best decisions that you can make.
Just trying to do my part. All right, seeing no more questions. Oh, board member Vandermillen.
Yeah, actually on the stair thing, is there a way I could get that information? I didn't hear your answer. I'm sorry.
On the which thing?
On whether or not it's feasible to put those stair climbers in case of an emergency on staircases on the facility plan.
So Nikki, I think that the team will look at that and see what kind of information that we can add to that as part of the long range facilities plan.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And let me lower my hand.
Thank you so much for your parting words. So item 6.1, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned at 7:09.
You need to go play the lotto. Oh, you need to go play.